It was May 14, 1988 in Carroll County, Kentucky. A church youth group from Radcliffe's Assembly of God had spent the day at Kings Island Amusement Park. Their bus, filled with teenagers still buzzing from roller coasters, junk food, and inside jokes. As they headed home, tired but happy, the hum of the road felt safe. It was supposed to be just another long ride back to Radcliffe, but at 10:55 p.m., their world turned into fire. Coming from the opposite direction, a black Toyota pickup tore through the night traveling the wrong way down the highway. Behind the wheel was 34-year-old Larry Mahoney, a factory worker so drunk he didn't realize he was speeding directly into oncoming traffic. Seconds later, headlights met headlights, and there was no time to react. The truck slammed head-on into the bus with devastating force. The collision shattered metal, crumpled the front end, and ruptured the bus's unprotected fuel tank. At first, it seemed like a survivable crash. Almost no one had been fatally injured on impact, but then came the fire. The leaking gasoline ignited instantly, flames racing up the aisle. Panic erupted. Inside, 67 people, most of them children, scrambled to escape. The front door was jammed shut from the impact. Thick black smoke poured through the narrow aisle as the heat became unbearable. Screams filled the air, desperate cries for help, for mothers, for anyone. Survivors said the fire spread in seconds. Within 20 seconds you could feel the heat, one said. You heard kids crying, pushing, trying to get to the back. We were all jammed together. The only exit was a small rear emergency door. Everyone fought to reach it. Dozens pressed into the 12-inch wide aisle, bodies crushing together in the dark. A cooler that had been placed in the aisle only made things worse, trapping people halfway down the bus. Some tried to break the windows, but they wouldn't budge. One small woman managed to squeeze through a side window. When she looked back, the opening was filled with flames. Outside, passing drivers pulled over and tried to help. They smashed windows and dragged out as many as they could before the inferno became too fierce to approach. Within minutes, the bus was completely engulfed, a roaring fireball on the side of the highway. The children, still trapped inside, never had a chance. When firefighters finally extinguished the flames, the damage was almost too horrific to comprehend. 27 people were dead, 24 children, 2 adults, and the bus driver. 34 more were injured, many with severe burns. The youngest victims were just 10 years old. Their bodies were later found piled toward the back of the bus, all facing the same direction, all toward the only escape they could not reach. For investigators, it was one of the most disturbing scenes they'd ever encountered. No one on the bus had died from the collision itself. Every life lost that night had been claimed by smoke and fire. The 11-year-old bus, once a school vehicle, had a design flaw that turned it into a trap. The gas tank was exposed. The seat covers were made of flammable vinyl, and the exits were too few. Larry Mahoney survived the crash. His blood alcohol level was 3 times the legal limit. He later said he remembered nothing. Not the bar, not the highway, not the crash. In the hospital, he had to be told what he'd done. He was charged with 27 counts of murder and sentenced to 16 years in prison for manslaughter and assault. He served 9.5. In the years that followed, Kentucky changed forever. The Carrollton crash became a turning point in American road safety and in the fight against drunk driving. Some of the victims' families became leaders and mothers against drunk driving, MAD, including Carolyn Nunnally, who later became the organization's national president. Laws toughened. Buses were redesigned with stronger fuel tanks, fireproof seats, and multiple emergency exits. Today, Kentucky's school buses have 9 exits, more than any state in the country. But for those who were there, no law or reform could erase that night. Survivors spoke of nightmares, of guilt, of the smell of burning vinyl that would haunt them for decades. Parents described the unbearable silence that filled their homes afterward, bedrooms left untouched, laughter that never returned. On July 22, 2025, the roads near Chitungwiza, Zimbabwe, became the site of a devastating tragedy when a haulage truck lost control and veered into oncoming traffic. Colliding head-on with a minibus taxi in a catastrophic crash, that claimed the lives of approximately 17 people. The victims, including passengers in the minibus and pedestrians struck moments before the collision, were ordinary Zimbabweans going about their daily routines, people on their way to work, school, or errands, whose lives were suddenly and brutally cut short. Eyewitnesses described scenes of chaos and horror, with twisted metal, shattered glass, and overturned vehicles marking the spot where the collision occurred, while survivors and bystanders struggled to comprehend the sheer scale of the disaster. Emergency responders arrived promptly, but the severity of the crash meant that many victims had already died at the scene, while others suffered life-altering injuries. The minibus, carrying far more people than it was safely designed to transport, was completely crushed by the truck's immense force, highlighting not only the vulnerability of passengers in smaller vehicles, but also the ever-present dangers on Zimbabwean roads, where reckless driving, overloading, and poor infrastructure continue to contribute to high rates of fatal accidents. Local authorities launched investigations immediately, pointing to driver error and potential mechanical failure as factors. But the incident also sparked a broader conversation about road safety nationwide, with religious leaders, politicians, and community members urging stricter enforcement of traffic laws and greater public awareness to prevent such tragedies in the future. Families of the deceased were left to mourn in shock and disbelief, and communities gathered to support one another, while media coverage detailed the human cost of the crash, showing that behind each number in the death toll was a life full of potential, plans, and relationships abruptly ended. The Zimbabwean government faced pressure to act, reviewing regulations on commercial trucking and minibus operations, calling for better training, stricter licensing, and more rigorous safety inspections. But for many, these measures could offer little solace in the immediate aftermath of the disaster. The Seke Road tragedy served as a grim reminder of how fragile life can be, and how quickly routine moments can turn into irreparable loss, leaving scars not only on survivors and families but also on the collective consciousness of the nation. The crash underscored the urgent need for road safety reforms and a culture of responsibility among drivers, while honoring the memory of those whose lives were tragically ended in a matter of seconds on that fateful day. In reflecting on the accident, it became clear that while investigations and policy changes could address systemic issues, the human toll, including grief, loss, and emotional devastation, remained profound. The disaster revealed that accidents of this scale are more than statistics. They are deeply personal tragedies that demand both action and remembrance. Communities, authorities, and individuals were called upon to recognize the importance of cautious driving, proper vehicle maintenance, and strict adherence to traffic regulations. Beyond policy, the incident left a lasting mark on Zimbabwean society, emphasizing the importance of valuing human life, prioritizing safety over convenience, and acknowledging the fragility of each daily journey. In honoring the victims, remembering the tragedy, and implementing reforms to prevent future disasters, Zimbabwe faced the dual challenge of healing the emotional wounds while creating safer roads for generations to come. It was just after 1 a.m. on June 7, 2014, along the New Jersey Turnpike. A group of friends, comedians, writers, performers, were heading home after a night of laughter at the Dover Downs Hotel and Casino in Delaware. In the van was Tracy Morgan, still riding the wave of his comedy career. Beside him was his longtime friend, 62-year-old James McNair, known to everyone as Jimmy Mack. He wasn't just a comedian. He was a mentor, a giver, a man who spent his life lifting others up. That night, he had joined the tour for support, for camaraderie, but none of them would reach home. A Walmart tractor trailer barreled toward them from behind. Its driver had been awake for more than 28 hours, nearly 2 days without rest. He never slowed down. At highway speed, he slammed into the back of their customized Mercedes-Benz Sprinter limo. The impact was devastating, igniting a 6-vehicle pileup and ripping the van apart. Inside, chaos unfolded. Most of the passengers weren't wearing seatbelts. Emergency exits had been blocked or jammed. A plywood partition separated the driver from the passengers, cutting off their chance to escape. In the very back, where the crash struck hardest, sat James McNair. He died instantly. For McNair, life had always been about more than the stage. Born in 1951 in Peekskill, New York, he wore many hats. working in a homeless shelter, cooking at the Salvation Army, volunteering at church, organizing community events. He built a platform for others, creating the original Uncle Jimmy Mack Amateur Hour to give unknown comics their first shot at a crowd. Comedy didn't make him rich, but it brought him into the orbit of Tracy Morgan. The two met in Harlem in the early 1990s and became inseparable. As Morgan's career soared, McNair stayed close, writing jokes, offering notes, even freelancing for Saturday Night Live. For Tracy, he was more than a friend. He was family. But on that night, McNair never stood a chance. He left behind 2 children who would never again hear his voice or see him perform. Tracy Morgan survived, but survival came at a brutal cost. His ribs, his leg, his face, broken in multiple places. His brain, injured so severely that doctors placed him in a medically induced coma. For 8 days, he lay unresponsive, balanced between life and death. When he finally woke, he couldn't walk, couldn't talk, couldn't even see clearly. The man who made millions laugh now faced a new battle, remembering how to be himself. Rehab lasted 2 long months. Morgan relearned how to move, how to speak, but his spirit was fractured. He admitted later that depression consumed him, that mood swings left him lost. An upcoming show was canceled. For a time it seemed comedy, the thing that defined him, might be gone forever. The lawsuit that followed was staggering. Walmart settled privately, with reports placing the payout around $90 million, one of the largest personal injury settlements in U.S. history. But even that couldn't close the wounds. Walmart's insurers fought the decision, questioning the settlement, dragging Morgan's name through legal battles, as though his pain could be measured in paperwork. The National Transportation Safety Board left no doubt. The crash was preventable. The driver had violated hours of service rules and sped recklessly into the limo. He took a plea deal, avoided prison, and walked away. But for James McNair, there was no walking away. His body was laid to rest in Cortlandt Manor, New York. His family received part of the settlement, but no amount of money could fill the absence of his laugh, his generosity, his presence. It was the early morning of December 29, 2024, in Ethiopia's Sidama region, a quiet day that would soon turn into one of the country's darkest. On the narrow Jalana Bridge, a truck overloaded with passengers crept forward, its metal frame groaning under the weight. Inside and atop the vehicle, people clung tightly to some weary laborers returning from long days at a coffee plantation, their clothes still dusted with harvest soil. Others dressed in bright colors, fresh from a nearby wedding that had filled the night with laughter and music. For most, it was meant to be nothing more than a simple ride home. Instead, it became a journey into tragedy. As the truck neared the midpoint of the bridge, its tires hugged the crumbling edge of a road notorious for sharp bends and sudden drops. Then, without warning, the driver lost control. The truck swerved violently, skidded, and in an instant of horror, it broke through the side barrier, plunging straight into the Ganale Doria River below. The sound was deafening, metal twisting, glass shattering, and then silence as the vehicle vanished beneath the rushing water, taking dozens of passengers with it. What followed was chaos. Villagers sprinted to the scene, diving into the muddy current, shouting names into the air thick with panic. They clawed through the wreckage, searching for anyone still breathing. Slowly, the river began to release its victims' bodies, surfacing one by one, pulled onto the banks where blue tarps were laid out in grim rows. 68 men and 3 women were gone in seconds, families shattered, entire communities paralyzed by grief. Some parents found their children lifeless. Others realized they had no one left to search for. A handful of survivors were rescued. 4 in total pulled from the water, battered, unconscious, barely clinging to life. They were rushed to Bona General Hospital. One in such critical condition he had to be transferred to a larger facility miles away. Their testimonies were faint and broken, but the horror in their eyes said everything. The screech of the tires, the desperate screams as water filled the truck, the crushing silence afterward. Officials later confirmed what locals had long feared: the truck had been severely overloaded, far beyond capacity. Passengers were squeezed inside shoulder to shoulder, with others perched on top of the cabin, holding on as the vehicle swayed dangerously. Witnesses said the truck missed the bridge entirely at the curve, plunging headfirst into the river like a falling stone. It was the kind of tragedy many in Ethiopia knew too well: preventable, predictable, and devastating. By nightfall, the Galana riverbank had transformed into a scene of mourning. Families wept over rows of covered bodies, their cries echoing across the valley as the sun disappeared behind the hills. Rescuers stood in silence, drained and mud-soaked, staring at the wreckage that had claimed 71 lives. For Ethiopia, it was another entry in a long, heartbreaking pattern. The nation has one of Africa's highest rates of road fatalities, where overloaded trucks, poor road conditions, and weak enforcement turn everyday journeys into deadly gambles. But for Sidama's people, this wasn't just another statistic. It was the loss of brothers, sisters, parents, and friends whose lives extinguished in a single plunge off the Jalana Bridge, leaving an entire community drowning in grief. On the early morning of May 13, 1972, a routine journey along the U.S. Route 11W near Bean Station, Tennessee, became one of the deadliest highway disasters in American history. A Greyhound bus carrying dozens of passengers was traveling east through a narrow, two-lane stretch of road when it attempted to pass a slower-moving vehicle. At the same time, a westbound tractor-trailer loaded with asphalt approached from the opposite direction. With little room to maneuver and almost no warning, the two vehicles collided head-on. The force of the impact crushed the front of the bus and ruptured the truck's cargo, triggering an intense fire that spread within moments. The crash scene turned chaotic almost instantly, with flames, smoke, and twisted metal trapping many passengers inside the bus. 14 people were killed, including both drivers and 12 passengers, while several others suffered serious injuries. For those who survived, the moments after the collision were filled with terror as they struggled to escape the burning wreckage, making the tragedy not just deadly, but deeply traumatic for everyone involved. What made the Bean Station crash especially haunting was the road itself. U.S. Route 11W already carried a grim reputation long before 1972, often referred to by locals as Bloody 11W, because of its history of serious and fatal accidents. The highway was narrow, lacked a median, and handled heavy truck traffic, creating dangerous conditions that left little margin for error. Sharp curves, limited visibility, and frequent passing attempts turned everyday travel into a gamble. The Greyhound crash felt less like an isolated incident and more like a breaking point that exposed long-standing safety failures. Survivors later described the overwhelming heat of the fire, the screams of fellow passengers, and the helplessness of being trapped while rescue crews worked desperately to reach them. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but the intensity of the fire and the mangled wreckage made rescue efforts extremely difficult. The scene underscored how vulnerable passengers were when large vehicles collided on poorly designed highways, especially before modern safety standards and emergency response protocols were fully developed. News of the collision spread rapidly across the United States, with newspapers and television reports calling it one of the worst bus-truck crashes in the nation's history. Public reaction was swift and emotional, particularly in Tennessee, where anger grew over why such a hazardous road had been allowed to remain unchanged for so long. Investigations later concluded that the disaster resulted from a combination of factors rather than a single reckless act, including risky passing on a two-lane highway and the absence of physical barriers separating opposing traffic. The crash became a powerful symbol in debates over highway safety, infrastructure investment, and transportation policy. Over time, it helped push lawmakers and transportation officials to take road design more seriously, leading to improvements in traffic regulations and long-term plans to upgrade dangerous highways. More than 50 years later, the Bean Station bus-truck collision is still remembered not only for the lives it claimed, but for the lessons it left behind. It stands as a sobering reminder that major tragedies often come from risks that are known but ignored, and that road safety is not just about individual decisions, but about the systems and designs meant to protect everyone who travels. It was April 10th, 2014. Just before 6 p.m., the sun hung low over a lonely stretch of Interstate 5 near Orland, California. On that road, a charter bus carrying 44 high school students rumbled north, its passengers buzzing with excitement. These were kids with dreams. kids from working-class families who had boarded that bus to take part in a 2-day college tour at Humboldt State University. For many, this trip was the first step toward a future their families had never known. Laughter, chatter, and the kind of nervous hope only teenagers can carry filled the air. But heading south, coming the opposite way, was something none of them could have imagined. A FedEx truck, massive and unstoppable, barreled down the same road. And then, in a split second that changed everything, it veered across a 60-foot grassy median. Witnesses said it was like watching a monster break free. The truck sideswiped a Nissan sedan and then slammed head-on into the charter bus with a force so violent it could be heard for miles. The sound wasn't just a crash, it was an explosion. Flames erupted instantly, swallowing steel and glass in a fireball that lit up the evening sky. Smoke rose thick and black, curling upward like a signal of disaster. Inside the bus, chaos broke out. Screams, heat, confusion. Teenagers who moments earlier had been dreaming of their future were now fighting for their lives. 17-year-old Jonathan Gutierrez had been asleep when the impact came. He woke to fire, panic, and desperation, leaping from the bus with nothing but the clothes on his back. He escaped with bruises and a split eyebrow, but his friends, his classmates, were still trapped inside. Some never made it out. 18-year-old Ismael Jimenez refused to save only himself. As the flames closed in, he smashed a window and began pulling students out, one by one, until he was overtaken by smoke and fire. He died a hero, his final act one of selflessness. Denise Gomez, also just 18, didn't survive either. She was a leader at her school, a soccer player, a yearbook editor, the kind of student who inspired others. Like Ismael, she carried dreams of being the first in her family to go to college. Adrienne Castro, 19, from El Monte. Marika Serrato, 17, from Riverside. Jennifer Bonilla, who had a twin sister on another bus that arrived safely at Humboldt, all gone in an instant. The fire moved so quickly, so violently, that even adults meant to protect the students stood no chance. Arthur Arzola, a 26-year-old admissions counselor who dedicated his life to guiding kids toward higher education, died later in the hospital. Michael Mivette, 29, and his fiancée Madison Haywood, both volunteering as chaperones, were lost together. This was supposed to be their second year helping kids reach their dreams. Instead, their names joined the list of the fallen. In total, 10 lives were lost that day. 5 students, 3 chaperones, and both drivers. Dozens more were badly injured, some dragged out of the flames with their bodies burning. Survivors later recalled moments that sounded like a nightmare. Friends engulfed by fire, smoke so thick they could hardly breathe, windows cracking under the heat. Some victims were burned so badly they could only be identified by dental records or DNA. It was a humid morning on September 21, 1989, in Alton, Texas, a quiet town in the Rio Grande Valley where life usually moved slow. Children filled the yellow school bus with laughter and chatter, unaware that within minutes, their morning ride would become one of the deadliest school tragedies in Texas history. The bus, carrying over 80 students aged 12 to 19, rolled down Farm to Market Road 676. It had just picked up its last passenger when a Dr. Pepper delivery truck, operated by Valley Coca-Cola Bottling Company, sped through a stop sign. In an instant, impact. Witnesses said the sound was deafening. Metal folding into metal, glass exploding, screams tearing through the air. The force sent the bus careening off the road into a massive caliche pit, a water-filled crater left from mining. There was no guardrail, no barrier, just open space. The bus plunged straight into 10 feet of muddy water. Inside, chaos. Students clawed for windows, gasping as icy water surged in. Within a minute, the bus disappeared beneath the surface. The windows were too small, the exits too few, and the dark water made escape nearly impossible. Survivors said it felt like the world had gone black all at once. Rescuers arrived quickly. Border Patrol agents, police, volunteers, but visibility was zero. They dove blind, breaking glass, pulling out whoever they could. Parents stood at the edge, screaming names, praying for movement. Bodies were brought up one by one until the pit grew silent. 21 students were gone, 19 that morning, 2 more days later. None had suffered visible injuries. They had simply drowned, trapped inside the bus that once carried them safely to school. In Alton, grief was unbearable. The next day's football game turned into a memorial, hundreds gathering under the Texas sun to mourn. But as time passed, sorrow gave way to blame. Truck driver Ruben Perez was charged with 21 counts of negligent homicide but later acquitted. He lived with torment, saying, "Even though now I'm free, I still feel so much for the kids. I don't know if I'll ever get better." Lawsuits followed. The bottling company and the bus manufacturer paid over $150 million in settlements, but the money only deepened wounds. Some called it blood money. Neighbors grew distant, friendships ended, and a once-united community splintered under grief and resentment. The tragedy did lead to change, and guardrails were finally installed along FM 676 and other pits nearby. A junior high school and park were later named in memory of the 21 victims, marked with white crosses and a statue of Christ. Every September, parents still gather there, placing flowers beneath their children's names. On a Sunday afternoon in Missouri, a stretch of Interstate 55 near Festus, already narrowed and slowed by ongoing construction, became the site of a devastating tragedy when a tractor-trailer failed to reduce speed and collided with multiple vehicles, resulting in the deaths of 3 people and serious injuries to at least 5 others. The crash involved 8 vehicles in total and unfolded with terrifying speed, turning what should have been an ordinary drive into a scene of chaos and heartbreak. Emergency responders arrived to a scene of twisted metal, shattered glass, and displaced vehicles, working methodically to extract trapped passengers while simultaneously managing the shocked and grieving survivors. The truck driver later told authorities that he may have dozed off, a statement that underscored the fragility of life on the road and the immense responsibility carried by those operating large commercial vehicles. The victims were ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances, their lives abruptly ended or forever changed in a single, preventable moment. News outlets shared details about the victims, their personal stories, and the rescue operations, emphasizing both the scale of the disaster and the human toll it caused. The collision left a profound mark on the community, raising urgent questions about safety in construction zones, the enforcement of speed limits, and the protocols designed to protect both workers and drivers. Local residents expressed shock and frustration, some highlighting the visibility of warning signs and the design of the work zone, while others emphasized the human factor, the attention, alertness, and judgment required when navigating high-speed traffic in potentially hazardous conditions. Legal proceedings quickly followed, with the truck driver facing multiple counts of involuntary manslaughter, highlighting the accountability that comes when negligence leads to the loss of life. The incident also prompted discussions about the pressures faced by commercial drivers, including long hours, fatigue, and the demands of maintaining schedules, and how these factors can contribute to tragic outcomes when combined with high-speed traffic and constrained roadways. For those who witnessed the aftermath, the memory of the crash, the sound of impact, the sight of wreckage, and the urgency of first responders remain vivid, a reminder of how quickly normal routines can be shattered. In the days and weeks following the crash, families, community members, and officials reflected on what could have been done differently, from better signage and slower construction zone speed limits to stricter monitoring of commercial driver fatigue. The tragedy underscored the intersection of human error, mechanical responsibility, and infrastructure safety, revealing that even a single lapse can have irreversible consequences. Above all, the Missouri I-55 crash serves as a sobering reminder that the road is a shared space where vigilance and caution are essential, and where the ripple effects of one moment of inattention can be felt far beyond the immediate scene, affecting families, friends, communities, and first responders who bear witness to the aftermath. The incident emphasizes that life can be unexpectedly fragile, and that maintaining awareness, following safety regulations, and respecting the risks inherent in both driving and managing traffic in work zones are crucial to preventing preventable tragedies from recurring in the future. It was April 25, 2019, in Lakewood, Colorado. Traffic on Interstate 70 had already slowed to a crawl after a school bus crash near the Ward Road exit. Cars lined up for miles, engines idling, drivers impatient but unaware that something far worse was barreling toward them. Around 4:30 p.m., 23-year-old Rogel Lazaro Aguilera Medeiros was coming down the steep mountain stretch near Genesee in an 18-wheeler stacked high with lumber. He was young, originally from Cuba, living in Texas and working for a small Houston trucking company. But that afternoon, something was terribly wrong. His truck wasn't slowing. It was speeding up. Witnesses saw it flying downhill at over 85 miles per hour, smoke pouring from the wheels. He blew past a runaway truck ramp, then another. Exit after exit flashed by, each a chance to stop the disaster. He never took them. Ahead, traffic had nearly stopped, backed up from the earlier crash. Dozens of people sat trapped in their cars, unaware that death was racing straight toward them. Aguilera Medeiros swerved desperately, weaving between vehicles, nearly forcing some off the road. One driver even went live on social media, capturing the semi thundering past at impossible speed. Seconds later, the inevitable happened. The truck slammed into the line of traffic, minus 28 vehicles crushed in an instant, including 3 other semis. The force unleashed chaos. One truck carried gasoline, another mattresses, combined with Aguilera Medeiros' load of lumber. The collision turned the highway into an inferno. Flames erupted. Black smoke rose into the sky. Explosions echoed across Lakewood. People miles away could see the fire and hear the blasts. By the time emergency crews arrived, the scene was apocalyptic. 4 men were gone. 61-year-old Doyle Harrison, 67-year-old William Bailey, 69-year-old Stanley Politano, and 24-year-old Miguel Angel Lamas Arellano. 6 more were badly injured. Among them, an EMT named Malaya Harsh, who was pregnant at the time. She later admitted she thought she and her baby were going to die. Somehow both survived. Firefighters battled the blaze for hours. The wreckage smoldered until nearly 10 p.m. The interstate didn't reopen until the next evening. Aguilera Medeiros himself walked away without a scratch. He didn't run, didn't resist. Police arrested him the next morning. At first, he faced vehicular manslaughter charges, but investigators pushed further. 40 charges were eventually filed. Vehicular assault, reckless driving, and multiple counts of first-degree assault with extreme indifference. In court, Aguilera Medeiros wept, insisting he never wanted to hurt anyone, that his brakes had failed. He had no record, no history of violence, just a wife and a young son waiting at home. But prosecutors saw it differently. They argued he had blown past every warning sign, ignored every escape ramp, and drove recklessly into disaster. They pointed to his employer, Castellano 03 Trucking, a company riddled with safety violations, even hiring drivers who couldn't read English on roads where every critical warning sign was written in it. The trial came in September 2021. A jury convicted him on 27 charges. That December, Judge Bruce Jones handed down a sentence so staggering it shocked the nation, minus 110 years in prison. The judge admitted his hands were tied by Colorado law, but said plainly the punishment was more than he believed was fair. Millions signed a petition demanding justice. On December 30th, 2021, Colorado's governor stepped in. The sentence was reduced to 10 years. Aguilera Medeiros would still serve time, but not die in prison. It was the dark, misty morning of January 27, 2021, in the west region of Cameroon. The air was thick with fog along the winding roads near the cliff of Jang, a stretch of highway notorious for sharp turns and steep descents. It was around 3:30 a.m., and a 70-seat passenger bus made its way uphill, carrying families, workers, and travelers returning from the bustling coastal city of Douala to Bafoussam. Some passengers were dozing, others chatting quietly, unaware that within moments their journey would end in unimaginable horror. Out of the darkness came a blinding light from a fuel truck, speeding downhill, its brakes already failing. Witnesses later said it was moving too fast, perhaps over 120 kilometers per hour, the driver fighting to control it on the slick, fog-drenched slope. But there was no time to react. In an instant, the truck slammed head-on into the bus. The explosion that followed was so violent it could be heard miles away. Within seconds, the two vehicles were engulfed in flames, a roaring inferno of twisted metal and burning fuel. Inside the bus, dozens were trapped, unable to break the windows or reach the doors as the fire spread. The smell of fuel filled the air. People screamed, clawed at the seats, trying desperately to escape, but the heat was unbearable. Flames swallowed everything. By the time rescuers arrived, the night sky glowed orange over the cliffside, and the bus was a shell of blackened steel. 53 people were dead, many burned beyond recognition. 29 others, their bodies seared and blistered, were pulled out alive and rushed to hospitals in Chiang and Bafoussam. For some, survival would come with scars that would last forever. Governor Awa Fonka Augustine stood at the scene later that morning, staring at what was left. He confirmed what many feared: the truck had been illegally carrying fuel and had suffered brake failure. The dense fog had made visibility nearly impossible. A speeding truck illegally transporting fuel ran into a 70-seat bus, he said solemnly, his words echoing over the smoldering wreck. A collision between the truck and the bus sparked uncontrollable fire, which ravaged the vehicles and their occupants. The devastation was so complete that 22 of the bodies could not even be identified. Blue sheets covered the remains as families gathered in disbelief, hoping to find loved ones among the survivors. For many, there was nothing left to recognize, only ashes and twisted wreckage. Police and emergency teams worked through the night, pulling remains from the charred metal and searching for clues. 3 men, occupants of the truck, had survived and fled the scene immediately after the crash, but authorities would later order their arrest. The tragedy sparked national outrage. Road safety advocate Manfred Missimikan called it a succession of negligence, pointing out that the fuel truck had no legal right to transport such a load, and that Cameroon's winding mountain roads were too dangerous for night travel. For locals, though, this wasn't just another headline, it was a nightmare that felt too familiar. Cameroon's roads are narrow and treacherous, carved into steep hills and often cloaked in fog. Vehicles are overloaded, drivers overworked, and safety rules rarely enforced. People begged the government to ban night journeys or to repair the mountain routes that had claimed so many lives. On the morning of 5 September 2013, what began as a routine weekday commute in Pinetown, KwaZulu-Natal, quickly turned into one of South Africa's most devastating road disasters. The area around Fields Hill, a long and steep descent notorious for challenging truck drivers, was busy with traffic as commuters headed to work, school, and daily errands. A heavily loaded freight truck was making its way down the hill when, according to reports, it suffered catastrophic brake failure. The driver struggled to control the massive vehicle as it picked up terrifying speed, and by the time the truck reached the bottom of the hill, it was unstoppable. Traffic at a red light waited in vain as the runaway truck bore down on the intersection. Cars, minibuses, and taxis were tightly packed together, filled with ordinary people going about their lives, completely unaware of the impending disaster. Within seconds, the truck smashed into multiple vehicles with overwhelming force. Vehicles were crushed, flipped, or pushed aside, some almost unrecognizable under the weight of the collision. The scene was chaotic, with twisted metal and shattered glass scattered across the road, and bystanders watched in horror as the scale of the accident became apparent. The speed and force of the truck left no chance for the people inside the vehicles to escape, and the incident shocked the entire community, who would remember that morning as one of unimaginable tragedy. Emergency responders were confronted with an overwhelming scene. Firefighters, paramedics, and police worked frantically to free trapped victims from the wreckage while dealing with burning vehicles and unstable debris. Many people were severely injured, some with life-threatening trauma, and hospitals in the surrounding area were stretched to their limits as medical staff treated burns, broken bones, and internal injuries. At least 27 people lost their lives, although some reports suggested that the number could have been higher, and more than 80 others were injured, many with permanent disabilities or life-altering injuries. Families frantically searched for missing loved ones amid the chaos, and eyewitnesses recounted scenes of panic, screams, and desperate attempts to help strangers. The community was left shaken, and the incident dominated news coverage for days, highlighting not only the human cost, but also the dangers posed by poorly maintained heavy vehicles and treacherous road conditions. Relief efforts were immediate, but insufficient to fully address the trauma experienced by survivors and witnesses, many of whom described the sound of the crash as deafening, like metal tearing apart and glass shattering everywhere. The aftermath was heart-wrenching, with funerals, memorials, and vigils for the victims that drew attention from across the province. Investigations into the crash revealed serious concerns about road safety, vehicle maintenance, and regulatory oversight. Authorities examined whether the truck had been properly inspected, and whether mechanical failure alone or negligence contributed to the catastrophe. The driver was arrested and charged with multiple offenses, including culpable homicide, as officials sought to determine responsibility. Beyond the legal consequences, the Pinetown truck crash became a symbol of how quickly life can be shattered by preventable disasters. It prompted discussions about stricter vehicle inspections, better driver training, and infrastructure improvements on dangerous roads like Fields Hill. Years later, the tragedy remains a somber reminder of vulnerability on the roads and the ripple effects such events have on families and communities. Many victims were breadwinners and parents, leaving gaps in families and workplaces that could never be fully repaired. Memorials continue to honor the lives lost, and the crash is cited in road safety campaigns and engineering studies as an example of the deadly combination of heavy vehicles, steep descents, and mechanical failure. It is a painful lesson in how a single moment, a single mechanical failure, can have irreversible consequences, and it remains etched in the memory of South Africa as one of the most tragic road disasters in its history. It was May 4th, 2013, on Interstate 20 in Georgia. The Carth family was on a long drive from North Carolina to Texas, headed to a wedding. Behind the wheel was Mary Ann Carth, a devoted mother of 9. That day, 3 of her children were with her, Caleb in the front seat, and Analia and Mary in the back. 17-year-old Analia was the quiet one, thoughtful, creative, always writing. Her 18th birthday was just around the corner. Beside her sat 13-year-old Mary, the life of the family, with her 2 braids bouncing on her shoulders, always ready to make everyone laugh. Caleb, calm and steady, watched the road ahead. He would be the only one of the 3 to walk away from what was about to happen. Around noon, traffic slowed. Mary Ann tapped the brakes, careful, leaving space between her car and the one in front. But behind them, disaster was already racing forward. A truck hauling cars thundered closer, and the driver never hit the brakes. In an instant, the truck slammed into the back of the Carth's Ford Crown Victoria with devastating force, shoving the car sideways into oncoming traffic. Another vehicle struck them, crushing them further, before their car was pushed under the trailer ahead. That trailer had an Underride guard, a steel bar meant to stop smaller vehicles from sliding underneath. But in that moment, when it mattered most, it snapped apart like a twig. The Carth's car was swallowed beneath the truck. The rear end of the car, where Analia and Mary were sitting, was destroyed in an instant. Analia never had a chance. She died immediately. Mary was still alive, but her body was crushed. Her injuries catastrophic. Emergency workers fought to save her. They had to cut her braids, her signature look, the hair she had never once cut in her life, just to reach her injuries. 4 days later, on May 8th, Mary died in the hospital. Mary Ann survived with painful injuries, Caleb with a concussion. The truck driver was found unconscious after the crash. Investigators said he had drifted, lost control. He later pled guilty to charges connected to the wreck. His commercial license was suspended for 2 years. But Mary Ann and her husband Jerry couldn't just bury their daughters and move on. They wanted answers. Why had the Underride guard failed so catastrophically? It had met federal safety standards, but those standards were from 1998, and those rules never required testing for real-world strength. On paper, it was safe. In reality, it was deadly. Mary Ann began speaking out, carrying her daughter's story everywhere she went. She carried Mary's cut braids with her to events, holding them up as a heartbreaking symbol of what had been lost. Her voice, joined by others, made waves. Some trailer manufacturers listened. In 2015, companies like Stoughton and Vanguard began building stronger guards. J.B. Hunt even ordered trailers with improved safety features. Not because the government forced them to, because grieving families demanded it. But change at the federal level was painfully slow. Proposals dragged on for years. It wasn't until 2022, nearly a decade after the crash, that stronger Underride rules were finally enacted. And even then, side guards, which could save countless lives, were left out. Today, most trucks on American highways still don't have them. For Mary Ann, this fight became her life's work. She partnered with another mother, Lois Durso, who also lost a daughter in an Underride crash. Together, they lobbied, met lawmakers, filed petitions, and pushed relentlessly. Parts of their proposal were included in the 2021 bipartisan infrastructure bill, but still, many gaps remain. It was the afternoon of September 17, 1963, in the quiet farmlands outside Chualar, California. A flatbed truck, crudely converted into a bus, rumbled down a dusty private road, carrying 58 migrant farm workers. They were exhausted after a long, back-breaking day harvesting celery, packed shoulder to shoulder on wooden benches beneath a flimsy canopy. For most, this was just another ride back to camp. For 32 of them, it would be their last. The driver, Francisco Pancho Espinosa, was a foreman trusted to transport his crew. The men behind him, many part of the Bracero program, Mexican laborers brought to California to fill agricultural jobs, couldn't see the road ahead or speak to him over the roar of the engine. The truck rattled east along Thomas Ranch Road, a narrow lane that cut across a lonely railroad track. There were no warning lights, no crossing gates, not even a sign. Just 2 lines of steel running through the dirt, glinting faintly in the afternoon light. From the south, a Southern Pacific freight train thundered toward them, 4 diesel locomotives pulling 71 loaded cars at nearly 65 miles per hour. The engineer saw the truck too late. He yanked the emergency brake. Sparks screamed from the wheels, but the train was too heavy, too fast. Espinosa crept forward, unaware of the danger, and in one horrifying instant, metal met metal. The impact was cataclysmic. The train tore through the truck bus like paper, splintering wood and steel, hurling bodies into the air. The wreckage was dragged for nearly half a mile down the track, scattering twisted debris and lifeless forms along the rails. Those who survived the first impact were flung onto the gravel, battered, broken, and bleeding. Some were cut by their own harvest knives, others impaled by splintered boards. One man was severed in half beneath the wheels. Witnesses said the aftermath was indescribable. 23 died instantly, and 9 more succumbed to their injuries soon after. 15 ambulances rushed to the scene, but the horror was overwhelming. The tracks slick with blood, the air thick with smoke and cries of pain. One rescuer would later recall that blood poured out of an ambulance, like water. The victims ranged from 19 to 59 years old, fathers, brothers, and sons who had left behind dozens of children in Mexico, depending on them for survival. When the chaos subsided, only Espinosa, the driver, was found unhurt. Every passenger had been crushed, burned, or thrown from the vehicle. For days, authorities struggled to identify the dead. Most of the workers were known only by numbers, not names, a dehumanizing hallmark of the Bracero system. The FBI had to be called in to help with identification, while families in Mexico waited in agony for word that never came. The funeral arrangements became a public scandal. Officials in Salinas and the Mexican consulate argued bitterly over who would claim the bodies. Newspapers described a macabre funeral hassle, a final indignity for men who had died serving the very system that erased their identities. When the dispute finally ended, a mass funeral was held at Palma High School, where over 9,000 mourners filled the stands. Coffins, draped in flowers, stood side by side, each representing a life lost to indifference and exploitation. In the weeks that followed, investigators searched for answers. The Interstate Commerce Commission concluded that Espinosa had an unobstructed view of the tracks and blamed him for failing to stop. He insisted he never saw or heard the train through the dust and noise, and some believed his diabetes impaired his vision. Espinosa was charged with 32 counts of manslaughter, but a jury later acquitted him after only 4 days of testimony. Soon after, he fled California, haunted and in fear for his life. Rumors spread that he'd been killed in Mexico by the victims' relatives, though that was never confirmed. Years later, families received modest compensation, a $1.5 million settlement divided among the survivors and heirs, a small price for so much loss. Labor activist Ernesto Galarza investigated the disaster and uncovered the painful truth. These men had been failed by every layer of the system, by employers who cut corners, by officials who ignored safety, and by a government that saw them as numbers instead of names. His report, Tragedy at Chualar, exposed the exploitation behind the harvest fields that fed the nation. Today, the site of the crash near the intersection of Boleta Road and Broome Road looks ordinary. The tracks are still there, silent and rusted. But for those who remember, the silence is deafening. It was there that 32 men, who came to America chasing dignity and work, were crushed beneath the weight of a system that saw them as invisible. On the evening of 27 August 2022, the small Dutch hamlet of Zuidzijde in South Holland experienced a tragedy that shook its close-knit community to its core. What was meant to be a cheerful summer barbecue for local residents, including families and friends of the new Bayerland Ice Skating Club, turned into a scene of horror when a truck veered off the dike road and crashed directly into the party area. The unexpected violence of the incident left people in disbelief, with neighbors watching helplessly as chaos unfolded before them. The truck struck several people indiscriminately, killing 7 individuals, including a pregnant woman whose unborn child was later counted among the victims. Beyond the fatalities, multiple others suffered serious injuries, some life-altering. The immediacy of the disaster, paired with the intimate scale of the village, meant that almost everyone knew someone affected. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but despite their efforts, the magnitude of the crash had already left an indelible mark on the town. Families, friends, and first responders were left grappling with grief, trauma, and the question of how a joyous summer evening could end in such devastating loss. As investigations began, the focus quickly turned to the driver of the truck, a Spanish national in his late 40s who had been arrested at the scene. Initial reports revealed traces of cocaine in his blood, sparking widespread media coverage and intense public debate about substance use and road safety. However, the case was far more complicated than a simple matter of intoxication. Later investigations suggested that the driver may have suffered an epileptic seizure moments before losing control of the vehicle. This revelation added layers of legal and ethical complexity, highlighting the responsibilities of drivers with medical conditions and the challenges authorities face when determining accountability. Dutch prosecutors argued that the driver should not have been operating the truck due to his medical condition, while defense teams considered the seizure a critical factor that reduced his culpability. This combination of human error, medical condition, and potential substance influence turned the accident into a cautionary tale about the risks inherent in transporting heavy vehicles and the need for rigorous safety regulations, training, and oversight. The aftermath of the Zuidzijde crash has continued to resonate within the Netherlands and beyond. Court proceedings culminated in 2025, with the driver receiving a prison sentence of just over 3 years, alongside a driving ban, reflecting both punishment and acknowledgement of mitigating circumstances. Beyond the courtroom, the community has sought ways to honor the victims, establishing memorials and commemorations to remember those whose lives were abruptly and tragically cut short. The accident prompted broader conversations about road safety near public gatherings, awareness of medical conditions for professional drivers, and the role of substances in preventing responsible operation of heavy machinery. While the statistics of 7 deaths and several injuries are stark, the human stories behind those numbers underscore the depth of loss. Friends, family members, and neighbors whose lives were irrevocably changed in a single instant. Zuidzijde's tragedy serves as a sobering reminder of how quickly ordinary life can be disrupted, and it stands as a call for vigilance, compassion, and preventive measures to avoid similar heartbreak in the future. It was April 6, 2018, on a quiet stretch of highway near Armley, Saskatchewan. A bus carried 28 souls, players, coaches, and staff from the Humboldt Broncos junior hockey team. They were headed north on Highway 35 toward Nipawin, chasing a playoff dream. For the town of Humboldt, a place of fewer than 6,000, the Broncos weren't just a hockey team. They were family. The boys lived with host families, went to local schools, and wore the green and gold with pride. That night, after a grueling triple overtime loss days before, they were determined to fight back in Game 5. The bus was driven by Glenn Dirksen, a seasoned, careful driver. Inside, the players were buzzing with energy, joking, listening to music, preparing themselves mentally for the game ahead. But around 5 p.m., just outside Tisdale, everything unraveled in an instant. At a place locals know as Armley Corner, the intersection of Highway 35 and Highway 335, the bus crossed paths with a transport truck. That truck was driven by 29-year-old Jaskirat Singh Sidhu, a new trucker hauling heavy bales of peat moss. He was supposed to stop at a flashing stop sign, but he didn't. Traveling nearly 100 kilometers per hour, Sidhu blew straight through it. And in that moment, the Broncos bus struck the side of the truck's lead trailer. The sound was deafening. The impact ripped the front of the bus apart, scattering metal, glass, and bodies into a nearby snowy field. The load of peat moss spilled everywhere. The chaos that followed was unbearable. Some players were thrown from the bus, their bodies lying in the snow. Others were trapped inside, screaming, crying, or silent. Defenseman Ryan Strashnitsky blacked out, only to wake moments later on the frozen ground. He couldn't move his legs. Around him lay teammates, bloodied and broken. Beside him, Nick Shumlansky moaned in pain. Not far away was defenseman Logan Boulet, who would not survive. 14 lives were lost right there at the scene. Emergency crews swarmed in, pulling survivors from the wreckage, rushing them to hospitals. 2 more would die in the days after. In total, 16 lives were taken. 10 players, ranging from just 16 to 21 years old, including Captain Logan Schatz and the youngest, Adam Harold, along with coaches, team staff, and driver Glenn Dirksen. The survivors were scarred forever, their lives divided into before and after. And then came the cruelest twist. In the aftermath, one of the defensemen, Xavier Labelle, was mistaken for teammate Parker Tobin. Both had dyed blonde hair, both had playoff beards. Label had no ID and was unconscious. His family was told he had died. Parker's family was told he had survived. It wasn't until days later, when Xavier opened his eyes and whispered his name, that the truth was revealed. 2 families had their worlds turned upside down twice. The crash shattered more than a team. It broke a nation's heart. Tributes poured in from across Canada and beyond. Wayne Gretzky wept in public. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau spoke in disbelief. Even Donald Trump sent condolences from the U.S. NHL players wore Broncos jerseys in honor. Investigators soon pieced together what had happened. Sidhu had missed more than just a stop sign. He had broken multiple safety rules in the days leading up to the crash, driving too long, failing to log his hours properly. He admitted he had been distracted by a flapping tarp on his trailer. He wasn't impaired, but he wasn't paying attention either. One small failure to stop cost 16 lives. In January 2019, Sidhu stood in court, his voice trembling as he pled guilty to 29 charges. He made no excuses. The judge sentenced him to 8 years in prison, but the story didn't end there. Sidhu was a permanent resident, not a Canadian citizen. After serving part of his sentence, he was granted parole, but deportation loomed. In May 2024, the order came. He was to be sent back to India. His lawyers appealed, pointing to his young son's serious health issues and the lack of adequate care in India. Families of the victims were split. Some believed deportation was justice. Others, like the father of Evan Thomas, said it wasn't necessary. Ryan Strashnitsky, now paralyzed from the chest down, chose compassion, saying he wished Sidhu peace, human to human.